The conventional account of the abolition of slavery in the United States and the subsequent Reconstruction era frequently presents these developments as the culmination of a moral crusade led by principled individuals and political factions committed to human dignity, Christian ethics, and Republican ideals. In this view, the radical Republicans, alongside earlier abolitionist societies, are depicted as heroic agents of liberation who overcame entrenched evil through unwavering conviction. Such portrayals emphasize the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as landmarks of ethical progress and portray the North as possessing a superior moral stance compared to the slaveholding South. This narrative, while emotionally compelling, simplifies a far more intricate historical reality in which moral rhetoric often served as a publicly acceptable justification for a constellation of political, economic, and sectional objectives. A closer examination reveals that opposition to slavery, particularly its expansion into new territories, was frequently rooted in pragmatic considerations rather than disinterested humanitarianism. Many Northern opponents of slavery sought to protect white labor markets from the perceived threat of cheap or unpaid slave labor, preserve economic opportunities for white settlers in Western lands, and curb the political influence of Southern slaveholders. The free soil ideology, which became a foundational element of the Republican Party, explicitly framed the containment of slavery as a means of safeguarding the dignity and economic prospects of free white men. This position was not primarily concerned with the welfare of enslaved African Americans, but with preventing the displacement of white workers and the monopolization of fertile territories by plantation agriculture. The divergence between public moral language and underlying motivations extends to the Reconstruction policies advanced by radical Republicans. While these measures advanced significant legal protections for freed people, they simultaneously served to consolidate Republican power, restructure Southern economies along Northern industrial lines, and manage racial dynamics in ways that minimize disruption to Northern white interests. The absence of any coherent plan for racial integration, coupled with reliance on pre-existing Northern exclusionary laws and the promotion of colonization schemes, underscores the extent to which emancipation was envisioned as a contained process rather than a pathway to biracial equality. This essay explores these layered intentions, demonstrating that the abolitionist and Reconstruction movements were shaped by a complex interplay of sectional ambition, economic calculation, racial containment strategies, and limited moral idealism. The spectrum of abolitionist motivations. Abolitionism in the United States encompassed a broad array of groups and perspectives, ranging from early Quaker-led gradualist societies to the more radical immediatist organizations of the 1830s. The Pennsylvania Abolition Society, established in 1775, and similar bodies focused initially on gradual emancipation and assistance to free black individuals, often within a framework that accepted racial hierarchy. By the 1830s, the American Anti-Slave Society, under William Lloyd Garrison's influence, shifted toward immediate, uncompensated emancipation and rejected political compromise. These groups employed moral suasion, publications, petitions, and public lectures, frequently invoking Christian principles and universal human rights. Yet internal divisions over tactics, women's participation, and political engagement led to splintering, with some factions forming the Liberty Party to pursue electoral strategies. The rise of the Republican Party in 1854 marked a critical juncture, as the party coalesced around opposition to slavery's expansion rather than immediate nationwide abolition. This stance appealed to a wide Northern constituency, including workers, farmers, and immigrants who feared that slave labor in new territories would undermine free white opportunity. The slogan, "Free Soil, Free Labor, Free Men," encapsulated an economic protectionism that prioritized white labor markets over black equality. Many Northern politicians framed their position in moral terms, condemning slavery as incompatible with Republican values, while their electoral success rested on appeals to constituents' self-interest. Radical voices within the party, such as Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, pushed further toward full emancipation and rights, but the broader coalition relied heavily on pragmatic arguments about labor competition and sectional balance. The interplay between moral rhetoric and material interest reveals a persistent tension within anti-slavery sentiment. While dedicated abolitionists emphasized slavery as a sin requiring repentance, the mass base of Northern opposition often viewed the institution as a threat to white economic prospects and political power. This duality allowed politicians to deploy ethical language that resonated with evangelical and Republican ideals while advancing policies that protected Northern regional advantages. The result was a movement that achieved emancipation, but did so through a coalition whose priorities extended well beyond humanitarian concern. Free soil ideology and economic self-interest. The Free Soil Party, active from 1848 to 1854, articulated one of the most influential strands of Northern anti-slavery thought. Its platform opposed the extension of slavery into Western territories, arguing that such expansion would enable large-scale plantation agriculture to dominate land and labor markets. Free soil advocates contended that unpaid slave labor would depress wages, stigmatize manual work, and block ordinary white men from acquiring property and achieving economic independence. This position explicitly prioritized the interests of white settlers and workers, with little regard for the fate of enslaved or free black people beyond preventing their presence in new lands. When the Free Soil Party dissolved following the Kansas-Nebraska Act, its supporters largely merged into the Republican Party, carrying forward the free labor ideology as a central plank. Republican rhetoric frequently invoked the dignity of free labor and the threat posed by the slave power, a term denoting Southern elites' disproportionate national influence. Yet beneath these appeals lay a clear economic calculus. Containing slavery preserved opportunities for white farmers and laborers while limiting the South's ability to export its labor system westward. Politicians such as David Wilmot openly declared that their concern was for the white working man rather than black liberation. This economic dimension of anti-slavery sentiment was neither secondary nor incidental. It formed the primary motivation for a substantial portion of Northern voters and officeholders who supported restrictions on slavery's growth. The absence of advocacy for black equality or integration in these circles further illustrates that the goal was often containment rather than emancipation for its own sake. By framing opposition in terms of protecting free white labor, politicians could mobilize broad support without confronting the deeper social and racial implications of ending slavery. Northern racial containment strategies. Northern states maintained a variety of legal and social barriers designed to limit black presence and influence long before the Civil War. Several enacted black exclusion laws or restrictive codes requiring bonds, certificates of freedom, or outright prohibitions on settlement. These measures reflected widespread apprehension about economic competition and perceived social degradation associated with black populations. Politicians and voters frequently assumed that emancipation, if confined to the South, would not result in significant migration northward, thereby preserving northern labor markets and racial demographics. Colonization emerged as a prominent proposed solution to the perceived problem of a free black population. Prominent figures, including Abraham Lincoln during much of his pre-presidential and early presidential career, endorsed voluntary relocation of freed people to Africa, the Caribbean, or Central America. The argument rested on the belief that profound racial differences rendered peaceful coexistence impossible within the United States, predicting inevitable conflict or subordination. Congressional funding supported colonization efforts, though most initiatives proved logistically unfeasible and encountered strong opposition from black leaders. The persistence of these containment strategies reveals a fundamental limitation in Northern anti-slavery thought. While radical abolitionists advocated for immediate freedom and equal rights, the mainstream position envisioned emancipation as a process that could be geographically and socially contained. The combination of state-level exclusionary policies and colonization advocacy allowed many Northerners to support abolition without accepting the consequences of a biracial society. This approach reflected both racial prejudice and economic calculation, prioritizing white opportunity over meaningful integration. Radical Republican policies and their strategic objectives. The Radical Republicans, emerging as a forceful faction within the Republican Party during the Civil War and Reconstruction, advanced a series of transformative measures that abolished slavery and established legal protections for freed people. The 13th Amendment eradicated slavery nationwide, while the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment secured citizenship and equal protection under the law. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 imposed military governance on the South, mandated new constitutions with black male suffrage, and required ratification of the 14th Amendment for readmission. The 15th Amendment prohibited racial discrimination in voting, and subsequent enforcement acts empowered federal intervention against violence targeting black voters. These policies pursued multiple objectives simultaneously. By enfranchising black men, radicals created a loyal Republican electorate in the South, ensuring party control of state governments and protecting Northern economic priorities such as protective tariffs and infrastructure investment. The measures weakened the former planter class, opened Southern markets to Northern capital, and aimed to reconstruct the region along free labor capitalist lines. While genuine commitment to black rights motivated many radicals, these ideological aims aligned with strategic imperatives of sectional dominance and party survival. The absence of any detailed integration framework accompanied these legislative achievements. Most Northern leaders assumed freed people would remain in the South, either as subordinate laborers or through colonization. Northern states retained exclusionary practices, and public opinion resisted large-scale black migration. The reliance on federal enforcement to protect black rights proved temporary, as waning Northern commitment and Southern resistance culminated in Reconstruction's collapse by 1877. The radical program thus represented a blend of principled reform and calculated power politics, achieving significant legal advances while falling short of envisioning or sustaining a fully integrated society. Conclusion: the real reasons Northern states opposed slavery expansion during Reconstruction era. The history of American abolitionism and Reconstruction shows these events stemmed from a mix of sectional rivalries, economic self-interest, political power plays, and limited anti-slavery sentiment rather than any sweeping moral victory. Northern opposition to slavery focused heavily on blocking its spread into Western territories to protect white labor markets, keep land available for white settlers, and stop Southern planters from gaining more congressional seats and national influence through the Three-Fifths Clause and new slave states. The Free Soil Platform and early Republican Party built their appeal around exactly these concerns, preserving the dignity and economic prospects of free white men by containing the plantation system and the cheap labor it relied on. Radical Republican measures during and after the war, the 13th Amendment ending slavery, the 14th granting citizenship and equal protection, the 15th extending suffrage to black men, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and the Reconstruction Acts imposing military rule and new state constitutions, delivered major legal and structural shifts. Those policies gave Republicans a reliable voting bloc in the South, broke the power of the old planter class, opened the region to Northern investment and railroads, locked in high protective tariffs, and reoriented Southern agriculture toward free labor capitalism that benefited Northern industry and finance. Black enfranchisement served as a tool to secure Republican state governments and electoral votes for the party's broader economic and sectional agenda. Northern states kept their own black exclusion laws and residency restrictions in place throughout the era, and many Northern politicians and voters continued to back colonization plans to send freed black people outside the United States, schemes Abraham Lincoln himself supported for years as a way to avoid racial conflict and preserve white majority demographics in both sections. No serious, long-term program ever existed for integrating freed people into Northern society or redistributing land and resources on a scale that would have made them economically independent. Federal enforcement of black rights depended on Northern political will, which faded quickly once the immediate wartime and immediate post-war goals were met, leading to the Compromise of 1877, troop withdrawal, and the end of Reconstruction. These developments produced real and lasting constitutional changes that formally dismantled chattel slavery and created new citizenship and voting protections on paper. At the same time, they reflected the practical boundaries of Northern priorities: advancing economic opportunity, consolidating Republican dominance, reshaping the South to fit Northern industrial interests, and containing rather than resolving racial questions. The era's outcomes emerged from that combination of motives, not from any unified commitment to racial equality or disinterested humanitarianism.